Terrific. Well, why don't we get started since it's 4 p.m. Some may join later on, but I just want to welcome everyone to the Google for Entrepreneurs Youth Entrepreneurship Panel Discussion. My name is Fab Dolan. I work in marketing here at Google Canada in our Toronto office. We are so thrilled to be having this discussion. We've heard that we've got students from all across Canada joining us today. In particular, should give a shout out to schools at Concordia, or students at Concordia, University of Western Ontario, York University, and McMaster. I think we've got tons of students from there. Talent Ag, I believe members of that site are actually watching us live today. So this is definitely a big-scale national event, and really thrilled to have everyone here. One of the interesting things about entrepreneurship and startups is that it's kind of like jumping off a cliff and then building the plane as you're on your way down. So it's a very, very exciting but scary topic and endeavor for most people, but really worthwhile. Certainly personally fulfilling, and also important for our overall economy, and certainly more broadly than just the personal benefits. We are so fortunate to actually be joined by 3 outstanding panelists from within our own Google community to talk about entrepreneurship, their own experiences, and give advice to students across the country. Google is, we still think about ourselves as one of the world's largest startups and try to live and breathe that every single day. So it's important for us to give back. And to that end, we are actually having Google for Entrepreneurs events happening all over the world right now, and in Canada doing this event specifically with students because they so are deserving of our time and attention and support as you start your businesses. So in just a moment, I'm going to move into a few questions for our panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves, and you'll get a sense of the great experience that they have. Shortly thereafter, about midway through our hour together, we're going to be switching things over, and I will be dropping off as your host, and Tracy, who can wave, there you go, Tracy, who also works in marketing at Google Canada, will be leading the discussion in terms of questions from the audience and questions from students. So as you're watching and hearing our panel discussion, what I would love for you to do is actually either tweet or go to your Google Plus page and use the hashtag G4E, G the number 4E, students, and ask any questions that you might have. And Tracy will be picking those up, and then we'll be fielding those for the panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to start from my left to right and just get our panelists to introduce themselves and give us a sense of what your entrepreneurial background or your startup experience is. And I'll start with Dave.
Hey guys, thanks Fab. So my name's Dave Brown. I handle YouTube content partnerships for Canada, and my background, I actually started out on with TELUS and moved to the entrepreneurial side with a vendor we were working with out of Toronto. Was there for 3 years, and then actually started doing corporate development, which means mergers and acquisitions, strategic investments, and technology licensing deals, and those were primarily done with tech startups and media startups. And today I also mentor at an incubator out of Toronto called Incubes. So look forward to the discussion and any questions that you guys have.
Great, and we'll move to Neil Shankman.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. My name's Neil Shankman. First off, hello to my peeps at Western and at York University, both universities that I attended. And in fact, actually, I began the early part of my career as a business school prof. At the Schuler School of Business. So double props to the people at York, but great to meet everybody who's online. As I mentioned, I spent the first part of my career as an academic/consultant. So taught at biz school and at law school, strategy, organization theory. Also was heavily involved in consulting with all the major consulting firms. And then I left that world actually to become an entrepreneur. And during that time, I was involved in both starting or growing 3 companies in the media, technology, and entertainment space before joining my recent role, which is to lead large advertising marketing at Google. So hopefully our next hour will be of interest and helpful to everybody who's watching on the internet.
Great. And all the way from our Dublin office, we've got Perihan. Perihan, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. So yeah, I am from working from Dublin as a business strategist. So basically, I work on developing strategies, advertising strategies for clients in the MENA market. That's Middle East and North Africa. My entrepreneurial background actually started when I was still a fresh grad. I started an online supermarket in Egypt, and now a couple of years ago, actually, I also started a media production company, and that's something that I'm still part of to this date. So hopefully, my experience would be insightful to you.
Awesome. So we're going to get things started, and most of the questions actually will be open to everyone on the panel. So I expect a lot of participation, and feel free to take this in any direction you see fit. But I'm going to start off talking about that moment when you have a great idea. I think many students, when they're starting out, they have more passion and drive than necessarily real-world business experience. And so even for those without a formal business background, I mean, what would your advice would be to on how they can get started? Maybe, Dave, you can start us off.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, I think that the passion is probably first and foremost, the most important thing when you're starting your own business. From what I've seen, that's probably the biggest indicator of success. I think we're living in a really fascinating time because you don't need to follow necessarily a curriculum in order to get education. I think the internet, among other things, obviously has brought down barriers towards access to information. And so, there's a ton of good material out there to get started reading on. Brad Feld launched a book last year called How to Be Smarter Than Your VC. And it was designed towards entrepreneurs in terms of getting knowledge on, in terms of making those deals with their venture capitalists, what they're looking at and what the various clauses mean. And, other people, Y Combinator and Paul Graham and those guys, they've developed kind of transparent term sheets where you can go in as an entrepreneur and get a sense of, what do all these clauses mean and what's kind of market and standard and fair. And so I think, researching what's out there, learning without feeling like you need to be following a curriculum, but also, following people you admire in the industry on Twitter and trying to forge those relationships as well, I think is invaluable.
Neil, can you maybe elaborate on that? I think you're one of the more passionate people, certainly in our office, and just how much is it just the knowledge that you have and the experience that you have versus the drive and just the willingness to just get stuff done?
Passion and drive are overwhelmingly the most important contributing factors to success as an entrepreneur. Primarily because being an entrepreneur is like incredibly hard work. All of us hear these great stories of entrepreneurs who have reached incredible success, because more often than not when we hear about entrepreneurs, it's when they exit their company through some kind of sale or transaction, or they've reached a certain level of profile where they're already at the stage where they have like a really great story to tell. But what isn't often seen is the path, the painful and challenging path that got them there. How many missteps they had, the moments of self-doubt and failure, the moments of challenge, the moments of having to pivot strategy, the moments of having to reevaluate an original plan. So passion and drive, and then I would add to that tenacity, just the ability not to give up. Because there'll be lots of moments along the way when all indicators might seem you might want to give up, whether you're not able to develop your product in the way that you would like to, you're not acquiring customers fast enough, you're running out of financing or money, and all the sort of typical challenges that an investor will face. So passion, drive, and tenacity for sure are critical factors. And then beyond that, and maybe this is just sort of the foundational academic / biz school prof in me, but I think it always can be helpful to educate and inform yourself as much as you can. But to Dave's point, it doesn't have to be through formal education or exclusively through formal education. There are some great schools of thought like lean development or agile development and agile creativity, which are helpful guidelines or helpful ways of thinking about how to actually operate as an entrepreneur. And when we get to questions, we can perhaps go into those ideas into more detail. But the idea is to have some kind of game plan. And you get that game plan by educating yourself, reading as much as you possibly can. Then the second piece of that for sure is talking to everybody and anybody that you can talk to. Ask people to go out for coffee, take them out for lunch, and again, that sort of requires you to have some courage to reach out to people that you may not have a relationship with so that you can learn from them. I can give you countless examples of how I have prevented myself from making mistakes that I might otherwise have made by simply having conversations with people that have already gone farther down the path of what I'm attempting to do and learn from them. So I think a combination of doing your homework and reaching out to people to learn as much as you can, those are the really, really good first steps to help build beyond having a good idea.
Perihan, just going to your own experience, just starting your business, how much of what's been talked about so far rings true? Like, did you have was the long-term plan in place? Did you have like the tremendous business background to know that the numbers would all work out, or how much of it was just having that great idea, the passion to chase it down, and then learning as you go?
So yeah, so basically what David you just said sort of brings back a lot of memories. So definitely, as an entrepreneur, you breathe, you eat, you like everything. You drink your idea and your entrepreneurial venture. I had a business background, but I have to say that this was not the number one factor that actually helped me start up my entrepreneurial projects, because I would actually tap on the people part that Neil talked about. So I would have to say that whatever got me anywhere is the people around me. So it started off with researching everything and looking for people that would actually help me. I would have to say like 15 or 20 even mentors in every single field of life, and I networked with all of them. I would always say that my pack of business cards is the biggest treasure that I have. And I would go to my professors, or go to people that work in companies that I know that might help me. And with that, not only that you get insights on how the business can be done and avoid mistakes, but it also like opens a wider sort of thinking, of what can be done, and even not just people that can help you, but also the team that you build. So the first thing, even like VCs, I know we might be talking about that, but even venture capitalists, when they invest in a company, they look more for people. So also looking for the team, and teaming up with people that share the same passion about that idea, and can again breathe and eat and drink that idea with you, and then you take it forward and it happens. So, you don't really have to have the academic background. I mean, if you're not a business student, then simply just Google it, and there's a whole wide of range of information that you can find about starting business plans and even comments on them. And it's just going to be easy. It's not going to be difficult as long as you have the passion and the drive to start it.
See, that's how we're dealing with a professional, that they can give a great answer like that and get the product plug in the mix as well. That's great. I want to dive into something that you talked about, which is the people that you're bringing on. It's so important to think about who you're bringing onto the bus with you as you start that journey. And maybe Neil, we'll start with your experience. And what is your selection criteria for who should be starting this this venture with you, and what are some of the things that you should avoid, perhaps?
This is a great question, because fundamentally, success of a business depends on the team, the people. Everything happens from the people who have been assembled to actually create the magic that you're intending to produce. So, first of all, I think the most important thing is to avoid friendship for the sake of friendship, especially at the early stages of entrepreneurial ventures. More often than not, great ideas begin because old friends, good friends, new friends are hanging out, and they come up with an idea, and sort of a spark emerges, and that leads to a series of events. And the reason why friendship should not necessarily be the primary basis is that as the business moves forwards and its needs unfold, you need to have a diverse skill set, and there needs to be a role and reason for everybody to actually to be there. And also, friends may not be the best suited to resolve the inevitable conflicts or differences of opinion that are going to happen, and the natural tensions as a business begins to grow, an idea begins to reach fruition. And so my first sort of helpful word of guidance slash caution is not to run and presume that creating a business with the people that are your best friends or your closest friends simply because you share a good idea is the right way to go. So then that leads to the question, then who should be part of the team? And I think you need to have people that have different skill sets. It's great to have an individual who is a visionary, who's natural leadership skills, that can think about where the company might go in the future. It's nice to have people that have a particular interest or background or skill set in marketing. Operations is critically important, how you're going to actually build and develop your product and service and bring it to market and actually make it come to life. And some people have a particular interest or specialty in that. And then, of course, somebody who can manage the finances. And they don't necessarily have to be formally trained, but somebody who really cares and can manage about both the accounting and internal accounting sort of management side of it, as well as handling the ability to raise funds and deal with the financial people that you'll be interacting with. So I think strategy, operations, and finance are sort of the key pillars of building a relationship, moderated by intelligent or thoughtful use of friendship, so that the basis of the business going forward is a strong one.
So I think and that's some great advice in terms of starting the business. Dave, when you're looking at various startups and various new ventures, is there any particular thing that you latch onto when you're looking at the leadership team and how you would judge them? Just looking at is this a company we should invest in or not when you're thinking about the people?
Yeah, I think the people is probably the most important element of it. So oftentimes, there is a science behind looking at where you want to invest or who you want to invest in, but oftentimes there'll be 2, 3, or 4 companies that all on paper make sense, and the difference in terms of who you go forward with is no different than the criteria you use when hiring people. It's who do I want to work with, who can lead us in this category for the next 3 to 5 years. And so I think the people element, and also strength and diversity on the team itself. So to Neil's point, can they lead us both from a technology standpoint as well as be the visionary who stands up and takes an alternative view in an executive meeting? And I think there's no amount of price tag you can put on that. I'd also say that when you're just starting out, sometimes it can be overwhelming to think about all those different areas when you're looking at a set pool of funds that you have. And so I think oftentimes those skills you can outsource at the outset and maybe rely on some mentors or some VCs to help point you in the right direction, people on your board for that matter, when it comes to some of the more nuanced things, like, for instance, fundraising. So my advice would be, from where I stand, don't underestimate the value of talent, and to Neil's point, don't underestimate the importance of figuring out who the key players are going to be from the outset, but also, don't be afraid to run a little bit leaner than you think is comfortable, and look to mentors to try and fill those gaps, when you're first starting out.
That's great, and you mentioned a piece there that I'd like to jump to as the next main topic, because we've got a lot of students watching at business schools right now, and they're looking around the room and they're saying, there's my team. We do have that diverse skill set. I've got a great idea, and they share the passion. So we're totally ready to go, except I've got all this school debt. I don't have the resources to start. And so what are the avenues of getting funding that are available, and what are the recommendations to get the startup financing to get the idea off the ground? And maybe Dave, you can start us off on that one.
Sure. I think my advice there would be, there's a couple different avenues you can explore. There's obviously kind of the bootstrapping, friends and family approach. There's, what's popular today in terms of raising money through VCs, and also, raising money through debt. I think my advice would be, think about what you'd like to get out of the relationship. So don't necessarily just gravitate towards the first offer in terms of someone offering you money, but rather think about it from, is this what people would call smart money, where I'm not only getting the financing, but I'm also getting the assistance and advice of someone that's done this before in my field of expertise, who can actually add value, and think of them as kind of an ancillary team member. I also think, when you're thinking about the different avenues, you got to think about from a perspective of where do I want to be in 3 years or 6 months, and work backwards from that and say how much money, how much investing do I need? And finally, my advice would be, do your homework on who the options are. So, there are oftentimes VCs, if you end up going that route, will have a stated goal or a stated investing objective. So if you look at like Fred Wilson from Union Squared Ventures, for instance, he is very much motivated by networked communities. And so I probably butchered his mission statement, but if you're, depending on what you're looking at, if it's big data, for instance, there's a fund by Roger Ehrenberg out of New York who's focused solely on big data. So I would say do the research up front to save you some time from having meetings with people where there may not be a fit there.
Perihan, in terms of your experience, without going maybe into too much detail, but if we could ask you to share, how did you get the funding to get things off the ground, and even if you have the startup funding, to keep things moving?
So I'll give two practical examples from both my experiences. Actually, maybe those could be useful. So the first one, the online supermarket, and I think that's a good advice that any entrepreneur can start. What I did is that when I developed a business plan, and then I looked at the main resources that I needed, or the main areas, and I realized that there is the technology part, and there's the operations and supply chain part that constituted a big part of the budget, and also they were sort of the pillars. So instead of going for funding, or pitching it to a VC or angel investors with the whole sum, with the big amount, I actually looked for partners that shared. So I looked for the people that shared the same passion, that can take on that part. So I had a partner that developed the whole website, the whole system, and I saved myself a couple $100,000. And on the other part as well, I looked for somebody that took care of supply chain. So the number that I was looking for funding shrank massively. So that's one thing that you can start on, is basically look for the resources, the human resources, the people that can also reduce the amount of money that you need. The other business, the media production, so it was a perfect case of bootstrapping. So we sat on one table and everybody took out money from their pockets, and we collected enough to get our first camera, and then we celebrated the camera. We had a cake, celebrating that we have our first camera, and then we took to the street and we started shooting. And the approach was actually different. So usually in a media production company, what happens is that you create your own pilot and you start pushing it, to the media channels or the media buyers. But we did the opposite. We used a very good product that we have, YouTube. Dave is gonna love me for this. And we just put our videos on there, and then we create, because the content was really good in terms of value and in terms of even entertainment. So people, they became viral and people started watching them. So we already had a very strong case of good content with already the appeal and the likeness from the audience. So it was a lot easier to sell it automatically. So we started off with a couple of $1,000 investment, and now the company, after 1.5 years, is valued at $1 million. So that's a good example, I guess.
I guess so.
Very good. Neil, I'd love to jump to your experience on this, because I love the bootstrapping example that Perihan shared, because I think there is probably the temptation for students saying, thinking my only route is to get in front of a VC and get them to love me and give us a ton of money. But I mean, what are the examples of scrappy execution that you could share, and just kind of making it work on your own?
Sure, great question. One message that I want to deliver for sure is that the kind of money and the source of money that you might be looking for has to be strategically connected to sort of where you are in the development of your business. If you're just actually starting out, it doesn't make any sense, and it's too premature to even be thinking about VC funding. When you're starting out, really, bootstrapping is the only way to go, because anybody who's going to invest in your company, provide funding, is going to want to see that, A, you have some skin in the game, and then secondly, that you've been able to move your idea forward and move your business along on limited resources so that there's some kind of proof of concept and proof of the value of the business. So at early stages, your own money and friends and family, in most cases, really the only way to go. And that's why bootstrapping. I'm a huge fan of bootstrapping, and I also think it's in an entrepreneur's best interest to bootstrap as long as you possibly can, because you hold on to as much ownership and control of both the idea and the actual equity or the value of your company as you go. So I guess to my first point is strategically connecting what kind of money you need and how much you need to sort of where you are in the development cycle. So bootstrap at the beginning, friends and family, and that usually then takes you to the first round of financing. And the first round of financing, the round A financing, doesn't always have to be through VCs, and there are only a select handful of VCs that actually do really, really early stage investor funding. So that in that case, there are bank and small business and other type of debt options, and then there are angel investors, high net worth individuals, the sort of extensions of what I would sort of call the friends and family, but they're not friends or family, but the individuals who have resources that participate in and like to back early stage companies. And then once you're at a certain point where you have proof of concept, the company has gotten to a certain stage where you have the attributes where it makes sense to go talk to a VC, then you have those conversations. And I think an additional point that I want to make through all this, I'm a really big fan of ecosystems and competition within each of the fundraising phases. This is like a really, really helpful thing that I learned and some great entrepreneurs taught me, which is at each stage is to not position yourself as a hopeful recipient of funding, but as a value proposition where there are a number of bidders who are interested, so that you have multiple options and your bidders are aware that there are multiple bidders for you at different stages. So when you're starting out, if you're looking for angel investors or high net worth individuals who like to seed individual companies, it's having multiple conversations with many of them so that they know that you're in multiple conversations and they get a sense of the demand and competition there is for your business. And the same thing applies in the VC market. Talk to multiple VCs, because to the extent that you can increase some level of or create some kind of competition and interest for your business value proposition, the easier it is to raise money, the more likely of success you'll have, and the more favorable your terms will be. It's often the case where young businesses set themselves up with an almost all or nothing situation where if they don't get this funding and this is like their only option, there really isn't anywhere else to go. And the power imbalance that implies between the company and the funder is very large. And that's where young businesses can make a mistake and perhaps enter into agreements that may not be fair or may not be best for their long term because they're not opening up all the range of choices. So identifying the type of source of money related to where you are in your development and then creating some competition around interest in you financially are two critical parts of learning how to raise funds.
So you brought up a great point that there isn't just one source of funding out there. But in any scenario, wherever you're going to get the money from, you're going to be sitting across a table in a room with a potential investor, and it might be a VC, an angel investor, a bank, or it might be grandma. What advice do we have on how to get that elevator pitch just right, and what are examples of good pitches and examples of bad pitches that you've seen in just people selling themselves and selling their ideas? And Dave, perhaps you could start us off.
Sure. I think it's tough to really kind of quantify a good pitch versus a bad pitch, but I can say that having been on the other side of many of them, I think there's an authenticity that resonates with me personally, where if people identify, here's the research we've done, here's the market size that we think, here's what we think we can achieve, and here's why, but here are some known risks within the equation. To me, that resonates a lot more powerfully than, we've got it all figured out, not to worry, yeah, we've thought of that, moving on, in that approach. So I think when you're thinking about the pitch, know your audience first and foremost, whether it's a bank, whether it's a VC, whether it's grandma, put yourself in their shoes and think to yourself, what's going to be powerful for them to hear, and what background do I need to provide, in context do I need to provide, depending on the audience, and how deep can I really go with this. But ultimately, I think people will be sold on your passion for the business, the homework that you've done, and the picture that you're painting ultimately. But I think there is an honesty that that really resonates with both investors and with potential acquirers.
And Perihan, in terms of selling your ideas, is there anything you kind of learned along the way that works better?
So I'd have to agree with Dave on this. Actually, it's showing that you've done your homework. I think that's the one thing that was helped me basically, because oftentimes some young students or entrepreneurs that are starting off, they can fall too much in love with their idea that they don't see any associated risks or challenges, and once they're put in the situation where they actually have to pitch it and they get challenged, they get agitated because they either haven't done the homework to respond to that, or they just think that there wasn't any risks associated, and kind of takes away even from the passion. It turns the passion into a sort of kind of craze kind of thing. So I would say that even my experience, I recently a couple of months ago, I had to present a 7-minute pitch to a very very strong panel, and the structure was exactly like that. It was the research showing the opportunity that was there in the market, and then how are we going to do it, and then we presented the team, the A team we called it, what's that's going to make this happen, and then just showing the challenges that we're going to have and how we're going to address them, and put a bit of numbers, not too much, because at the end it's all projections, and that with showing that we've done our homework, and then we obviously have the passion for it, and people can read through that, they can see whether you have the passion or not, or you just stole the idea of the internet or something. So yeah, these are basically the two things I have to agree with Dave on, and I think my experience reflected those exactly two things.
And Neil, did you find the same thing? How did you balance being confident about your idea and showing that to someone who you're asking for investment, and also being honest enough to recognize that there are just some things that you won't know until you get going?
I think the short answer to that question is that you have to go so deep into understanding your business idea, the opportunity in the market and the ecosystem that you are going to find yourself in, till you get to the point of simplicity, so that you can actually present your idea in simple, understandable terms, but have in your back pocket, because you've gone really deep, the ability to answer questions, really, really challenging, probing questions, because someone who's going to be evaluating your business idea are going to be looking for the assumptions that are behind your model, the assumptions behind your approach that you might not be stating, because they want to examine whether or not those assumptions are correct. And they also are going to be looking for things that you might not have thought about. And one of the most challenging situations that you can find yourself in as an entrepreneur in these circumstances, when somebody asks you a question that you haven't thought about or contemplated that idea. So that's why this idea of doing your homework, I couldn't agree with the panel more strongly on this particular point. That's why I said about going deep into really understanding your business idea, exploring all the variations, your market, all the aspects of operations and finance, and every element of actually making this happen, so that when you're in the forum to present your idea, you can do it in a simple and elegant way, but speak from a position of confidence when people ask you, have you thought about this, or what about that, or implied in your approach is this particular idea, and I think that idea is problematic because of X, Y, and Z. What are your thoughts? Or if you're going to you're raising a certain amount of money, how are you going to use this money and why? Just all the kinds of challenging questions that you will be asked, and to be able to answer those questions with authenticity and confidence speaks volumes about you as an entrepreneur, and in many cases is actually the deciding factor about whether or not someone's going to invest in you or not, because ultimately they're making a judgment about you as an individual, as the steward for their money, and the idea that you're presenting as being a successful one in business.
Yeah, I think the way to think about it in my mind is investors are used to risk. They just want to know what that risk is. And if you can they're not looking for you to tell them there's no risk in this investment. They're looking for you to be able to say, I've identified the known risks and here's what they are. And I also think there's value in looking at the market today, but also projecting, what are the drivers and what are the levers that are influencing that market, and where is the market going to be in 2 to 3 years, and how does your idea fit in as a wedge towards the opening or whatever opportunity gap is being created by those drivers. I think so. Rather than looking at the market opportunity as a snapshot in time, look at it as a kind of fluid transition and be able to identify where your idea fits into that evolution.
Great. We're gonna skip right ahead to audience questions. I know Tracy has been gathering them as we've been chatting here. So Tracy, why don't you take it away and just let us know what's on the mind of folks in the audience.
Yes, thank you, Sab. So I think the panelists answered some great questions for us so far. We've got a lot of questions coming in from students online. I want to mention quickly that if you're watching and you have questions, you can ask them for the panelists on Twitter or on Google+, using the hashtag G4 as the number 4 E-Students. Again, that's G4 E-Students, which stands for Google for Entrepreneurs Students. So the first question I want to start off with is one that I've been seeing over and over again coming into the feed, which is, balancing school and a social or personal life is kind of tough to begin with already. And if you kind of throw in having your own business and being an entrepreneur in there, that gets really hectic. So what advice would you guys have for students or for young entrepreneurs on maintaining work-life balance when they start down the path of entrepreneurship? I think Perihan, maybe do you want to take this question first?
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie to you. You're gonna have to give up on some social life. There's, it's part of passion, right? So it's, we just agreed that, as I said earlier, that you're gonna have to breathe, eat, and drink your business. So it is gonna be difficult. There is no magical formula to it. I can't just tell you, do this and this and that. But it's mostly that your willingness to actually accept that you can't have it 100%, like you can't have it all, so yeah, you're gonna have to give up on some dinners and some Friday nights. I still work on weekends up to this day, but it really pays off in the end. So I guess that's the biggest rewards.
That's great. Dave, do you all have anything to add to that?
Not really. I'm just glad somebody else was a truth teller before I had to. I think, as someone who's tried to do a couple of things on the side, it's really tough to try and compartmentalize, running a startup or starting a startup. I think it's pretty binary. You're either kind of in it headlong or you're not fully committed to it, but the in-between is tough.
That's good to know. And Neil, do you concur with your fellow panelists here?
Yes, very strong agreement with my fellow panelists. And in fact, if you're not prepared to make that level of commitment, don't bother. And I don't mean that to sound discouraging, but as I mentioned at the very, very beginning, I said being an entrepreneur is a lot of hard work. People tend to glamorize because of the success stories that can come out of the experience of being an entrepreneur. But the truth is it's a lot of hard work, and that work is not necessarily always fun or offers immediate rewards. You have to be completely emotionally and personally and financially invested in the success of your business, and that means you have to give other things up. And in fact, the people who you're asking to align with you, whether they're partners or funders, are going to want to see that as well. Because if you're not completely committed to the success of your idea, how could you expect anybody else to be?
Well, that's great advice from all of you guys, and I think something that's coming through over and over again, even from the questions before, is that you have to do a lot of research before heading down this path. And one of that is understanding how much time and effort this venture will require when you have your own business. I want to move on to our next question, which comes from our Google Plus event page. And so this is from Joel. Joel asked, I I think most entrepreneurs have had many ideas for potential business ventures, but he would like to know, how do you know when you come across a golden idea, in a kind of a field of endless possibilities? Dave, do you want to comment on that first?
My short answer is you won't, unfortunately. You'll come across many good ideas that you'll wonder, and hopefully, doing the homework vets out some of the ones that seem like good ideas, but once you kind of do the research or talk to people or run the numbers, it may not be the opportunity that you thought it was. I think that, for most people, there's an inherent risk of, some company could decide to go in a different direction, which completely alters my business plan, and what I once thought was a can't miss opportunity is now kind of dead in the water. So, I think that there's always going to be an inherent risk, and that's why there's the massive reward in some cases, because it's not for everybody, and in order to take that leap of faith, the reward on the at the back end is really what the payoff is for having taken such risk and absorbed such risk at the outset.
Great. Neil, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I like to play the game best idea or last idea standing, which is really, instead of approaching your idea from the position of how can I find ways to support and see whether or not it's a good idea, is to spend as much time as you possibly can shooting down your idea and finding all the weaknesses. And if you were going to be a competitor or a challenger to your idea, what are all the ways in which your idea can fail? And what often is the case is you'll quickly see that many good ideas, or what seem to be good ideas at first, don't last very long. And it's the ideas that can sustain that level of challenge that actually often form the basis of really good business ideas. And they're not necessarily always the shiniest or the most compelling, but they often are. This is a quality test of your idea. So try and find all the ways in which you can challenge and debunk your business idea. And if it's pretty defensible, then that's one of the key indicators that you know that you have something that's really worth building on.
Well, great. Thanks for sharing that, Neil. And Perihan, after having heard what Neil kind of does with his ideas to identify the one winner, I was wondering, how did you finally settle on the few businesses that you worked on and started and decide that those were the ideas you wanted to pursue?
So I love actually what Neil just added to the table here. So it is really important to accept actually, people playing the devil's advocate and yes, shooting down your idea, because once you're able to respond to those challenging questions, not only that you become more confident of the business and you prove to yourself that you've done your homework, but you become sort of a better salesperson. You sell your idea better, and the more throughout the process, you will keep selling your idea to people, to customers, to financiers, to even people around you that want them to try out the idea. Another thing that I would say also that helped me much, especially after my first experience, is to do that exercise throughout the way, especially if your venture is a tech venture, because sometimes if the whole process of development might take close to like 9 months or like a year, the research needs to be done throughout the process, because there's so much that can happen throughout that process, and what seemed to be, or what research proved to be a great idea in the beginning of the year, by the end of the year things might have changed a bit. So I guess that's one thing. My experience involved a lot of talking, a lot of talking to everybody, a lot of talking to mentors like my professors, people that work, that are experts in the region or in the industry, and also talking to a lot of people that can actually use the service and get all those insights, and research more on them online or offline, and then basically, hearing all the challenges, and that's what gets you sort of more confident of the idea that you're working on.
Great advice there.
Tracy, I have one more thing to add.
Yes, please.
It's the idea to have the courage to pivot on your idea. Many entrepreneurs, if you talk to them, the idea that they began with is very different than the idea that they ended up with, even though they can trace a path of how they got from one end to the other, and the end idea doesn't look entirely different than the first one, although sometimes that happens. But it's an iterative process. You start off with an idea, you begin to challenge it, you see what you can do with it, you begin to build towards it, and as you receive market feedback, as you receive more information, as you grow more experience, often is the case you need to reevaluate and pivot your idea. So flexibility around your idea and flexibility to have a commitment towards success and growing your business, knowing that it might take different paths to get there and paths that you may not have initially contemplated is really important part of evaluating an idea.
Great advice, Neil. So I think that's a good transition to our next question, which comes from Twitter. I want to also say right now that our Twitter questions are being monitored by our friends at Talent Egg. Talent Egg is actually a Canadian startup venture. They are now a leading job site and career resources website for students and recent grads. So this Twitter question builds off the previous one, which is how can students or entrepreneurs validate a product or idea, and what should they look for in terms of thinking about measuring for success? Perihan, do you want to take a stab at this first?
Well, if you have everybody telling you it's a bad idea, then it might be. But also, doing a lot of research. Again, we can't, stress more on this. And research, it's not just because sometimes they're new ideas. So it's not just, looking online of what answers this, but it's also, even digging deep and, sort of looking for case studies and again, talking to people. People are the biggest asset. Talking to everybody that and not just the users, but also like people that can give you advice on, again, most importantly, the risks and the challenges that you might be facing. So it can even be like sitting and going to your professors and tell them what would this work out or not, and they will tell you. Oftentimes. And Neil used to be a professor, so maybe, and he tried the other side as well. Oftentimes, the professors can give you sort of the academic side of things, so they can tell you, if it's good from an academic standpoint. But it's also very important, and that actually, helped me a lot with my experiences, is to also go to people that represent the business side as well. So people that either worked in the industry or people that and more than one person actually, that people that can use the service as well. So there is no again, it's not like a 1 + 1 = 2, to how things, whether the business idea is going to be good or not, or to validate it, but it's just like, going through that process of doing extensive research and having answers, identifying what are the risks, what are the challenges, having answers to them, how you're going to address them, and then weighing in those challenges against the benefits. And if the benefits actually is stronger, then you'll know that your business might be or might have a strong potential.
Great. I want to get to a few more questions, so I am just going to move on to the next one. I'll let you guys take turns answering. So this next one comes from Natalie, who asked us on our Google Plus page, how do you know when to risk everything to continue on a startup, and how do you know when it's time to move on to the next thing? I want to give this one to Dave. Dave, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think it's probably the most difficult decision that you have to make, right? To Neil's point, some of the most successful entrepreneurs that I've spoken with or that I've talked to have had that very challenge, and sometimes they've pivoted their business with great accolades and great success, and sometimes they've second-guessed themselves and thought, had I just held out for another couple of months. But I think there is, just to underscore something that was said earlier, I mean, there's a lot that you can apply from research in terms of models and past business models and what's been successful. But oftentimes when it comes to a specific idea, the book is being written in real time. And I can't underscore enough the value of taking a 360 approach in the ecosystem. And what Neil said earlier about knowing your ecosystem top to bottom is just completely invaluable. So having relationships with potential partners or people that are even ancillary to what you do within the ecosystem, and maintaining even competitive relationships where you guys can go out and have a cup of coffee and discuss maybe at a more macro level the industry. But I think those will help you with drivers. But ultimately, you're going to have to assess, how much funding do I have? How long is it going to last me? What is the burn rate that I'm going through with my existing company, and what's the runway that I have for myself? And you're going to have to make a lot of difficult decisions. But unfortunately, from my experience, there hasn't been one kind of magic 8-ball or silver bullet that you can point to and cite and say this is the deciding factor, the determining factor. It's a little bit more art than science in some cases.
Great to know. Thanks for that. My next question comes from Twitter again, sent my way by our friends at Talent Egg. So this is from Catherine. She asked, what are your thoughts on incubators or the programs like that, or incubators and accelerators? And do you have any advice on how you would choose one among the different options available? I'll open this up to any of you.
Sure, I'll take a first stab at it, because I think this question leads well from the previous one. Just to pick up quickly on the previous theme, entrepreneurship involves risk. And as an entrepreneur, you need to be comfortable with risk. And so the question about how do you know whether or not you should continue to go forward is a similar type of question about working with incubators, because they're all questions that raise the issue of how much risk tolerance and how much risk should I be willing to or able to function through as an entrepreneur. So I think incubators, so as an entrepreneur, your job is not to take giant risks. It's to take calculated, informed risks so you make smart decisions. And so an incubator is one example of a number of options that are very smart to help minimize risk, because they put you in a circumstance where you are with other like-minded entrepreneurs who are in the same developmental phase that you might be in, surrounded by an environment that is helpful and supportive both financially and involving strategic advice. So I think incubators are always a positive circumstance, particularly if you are looking for ways to minimize or mitigate risk. The flip side, or the other side of it, is obviously if you work in an incubator environment, by definition you're giving up some ownership and control. And so that's a decision that you as an individual entrepreneur have to decide on your own. But in many cases, and there are lots of great examples of companies that come out of incubators that have reached great success, so it's a helpful thing to consider.
Yeah, just to add to Neil's point, I think if you were to look at it from an evaluative standpoint, you'd say, how many success stories do they have? How many startups have they grown up and exited, or how many are thriving today from an output standpoint of those incubators? And some of them have been around for longer, so they've got a bit of a head start. But I'd also look at what kind of access do they have, both in terms of resources, physical and otherwise, as well as from a human capital standpoint, what can they provide me in terms of intellectual thrust or access to people in various fields. And so I treat it much the same way as I would a discussion with the VC, where you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and look at it through a critical lens, as Neil suggested.
It's great advice from both of you. I want to close off our discussion now with one last question for all of you, which is, if we can turn back the clock and go back in time, what is one piece of advice that you wish someone had told a younger Dave, Neil, or Perihan before you started down the path of entrepreneurship? What is that one advice that you wish you had known about entrepreneurship? Perihan, do you want to go first?
So first of all, what are you talking about? I'm still young, so that's just to put that fact out there. Well, I would honestly say two things. So one is to always look for the people. People will get you where you want to be, especially if they share the same passion and they are willing to support you enough. So that's one thing, and also, and I think that's from my own experience, is to have a strong ownership of the idea, but not have too much of it. Always think, I wish that I actually had somebody to tell me, think of an exit strategy when you're starting the business. How where do you think, if this business went right, where do you want to take it further, or if it didn't go very right, what is the right, when is it the right time to actually let go of it, or how can you do that exactly? So that's the one great lesson that I actually learned throughout my experiences, and I think I wish that somebody had told me this when I first started.
That's great. Neil, how about you?
So I'll offer two. One is, don't fall in love with your idea, and the second one is have realistic expectations of how much work is involved in being an entrepreneur. And it's a theme that I've been saying throughout the discussion, but it's very true. It's much more work. It's much more complex. It requires much more commitment than I think most people appreciate, which is why the majority of entrepreneurs fail. If you look at the percentage of people who choose to be entrepreneurs, the success rates are very, very low. And it's not because the people who are attempting to be entrepreneurs aren't competent or smart or don't have good ideas. It's very hard to be successful. You have to work really, really hard. And I don't think most people appreciate the effort that's involved.
Great advice. Dave.
I think for me it would be trust your instincts. So once you've taken into consideration all of the other advice, and chances are you're probably going at and operating at a much deeper level within the realm that you're exploring than most other people, and your instincts are probably predicated upon a lot of the research that you've done and a lot of what you're passionate about. And so I think at a certain point, and a lot of the questions seem to be kind of circling around this, but at a certain point you're going to have to just jump off and take that risk and be able to trust that your initial instincts, which have been validated and to the extent they haven't been beat up by Neil's philosophy, if you come out unscathed on the other side after all that, I think there's a certain element where you just need to trust yourself and the work and the research that you've done.
That's great advice. So I'd like to conclude the panel discussion now. I want to thank all the viewers who are watching right now from online. Thank you for tuning in for the last hour. And I hope you guys learned something. I know these three panelists have been a wealth of information, and I want to thank you all for sitting down with us and spending time with us. So thank you, Dave, Neil, and Perihan. And thank you, Fab, for my co-host, for hosting. We're going to sign off now, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.